Chicago has started evicting many migrants from its shelters. It's also a very controversial plan because now you just have migrants sleep on the streets. Migrants don't know where to go. And now many migrants have come out and said that the whole entire eviction process was just not stable at all. You have promises of them being in the migrant shelters, and now they're being kicked out. And Chicago is very, very cold. And sometimes he's being told to leave earlier. Sometimes he's being told to stay. It's just mass confusion right now. People, honestly, are kind of sick and tired of the migrant crisis. The migrants in many cities are not even being treated right either. Many of them are evicted on sleeping on the streets. So the homeless population is up, and the locals don't like it because many Chicago citizens now are fed up since the city spends hundreds of millions of dollars on the migrant crisis. Whereas the south side of Chicago, for example, has food deserts, pharmacy deserts, barely any businesses, violent crime everywhere, to the point that the nickname of Chirac of Chicago still stays. So is New York City and Chicago ever going to change? I mean, they're already evicting shelters just to save some money, but now everyone is homeless. So what now? And look at this. Mayor Johnson even says that Chicago is being more open and quite accommodating to migrants than other blue cities. Guys, nobody really wants Chicago to be a migrant city anymore. If you look at some of the videos out there, there's actually a lot of people in Chicago. Plenty of these communities are actually rising up. There's several videos that you could watch yourself. You got people going to these city council meets and literally just cry out their frustrations. People actually start crying out to Brandon Johnson. Many people are very frustrated about this. They're like, you spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the migrant crisis. We elected you into office, and you never have any money being sent down to the poor communities. Many poor communities of Chicago are expressing themselves because crime is super duper high to the point that local businesses are shut down. You have gas stations shutting down. There's no more grocery stores. They can't even open a city-owned grocery store to supply the locals with fresh produce. Whereas they could spend $200-300 million on the migrant crisis and be okay with it. This is why Chicago citizens right now are actually having enough. Okay, people even said that Mayor Brandon Johnson is like a criminal right now. Many of these people voted them into office, into power, and they get nothing in return. In fact, there's communities in Chicago where 97-98% of the voter turnout rates is Democrat. Now, many of those voters are thinking about voting Republican because, well, this is kind of like what you get right here. And it sucks because, first of all, you're already spending hundreds of millions of dollars on the migrant crisis. Now, migrants are being evicted. Now they're sleeping on the streets. The domestic homeless population get nothing. There is no help for the poor communities of Chicago, and they're basically done. Not to mention, Chicago is trying to destroy the only last thing they have that generates money, which is a Bring Home Chicago plan. Now, the Chicago voters are giving a thumbs down on the transfer tax, and let me tell you guys why. Now, taxes are good, but when they get to a certain area in a certain range, it gets kind of ludicrous and people start leaving. So the Bring Home Chicago tax basically taxes properties sales that are worth like over $1 million, right? So if you look at this, raise it to 2% for properties worth $1 million to $1.5 million, and raise it to 3% if it's worth more than $1.5 million. Chicago real estate is already down in the dumps. In 2023, they were down 20.9% for home sales. And it just keeps sliding every single quarter. And commercial sales are even worse, with commercial real estate property prices dropping like almost 89% in some areas of the Loop. So one of the best places for Chicago businesses and commercial real estates. So Chicago is thinking about raising more tax money, I guess, to fund the migrant crisis. But guess what? Chicago is one of the cities with the least amount of construction cranes. Given how big the city is, it's very shocking. Go to Toronto, right? Go to New York City even. Go to Seattle, Miami. Go to Vegas. You see a bunch of construction and a bunch of construction cranes. But Chicago, construction has basically halted. The fall and the collapse of Chicago's real estate market, and also they're trying to tax them hard, is not a good idea. Chicago right now is running out of money, with some of the biggest corporations and hedge funds moving out to better places like Miami, for example. Can Chicago, New York City, and Denver get out of this massive migrant loop? Or will those just be the very first cities in the U.S. that fall, whereas other cities in the U.S. are going to be flourishing? Thanks for watching, guys. Comment below. How do you guys feel about this? It's getting worse and worse in many of these cities, and many communities are extremely frustrated.